Hello and welcome. I am so excited to be doing the introductory video, and this video is going to find its first home on my new Substack page. And so I want to welcome everyone who's watching this video from Substack. I know there was an influx of signups after I hosted a new moon ceremony for Priestess Presence. So I want to say hello to everyone who just recently found my work and then decided to support me. That feels like a massive gift. So what I thought I would do, this Substack is new for me, and I just kind of want to talk about how I'm relating to it, how I'm orienting to it, what new members can expect. And I'm just going to take a minute to do that because I expect that these videos will also at some point find a home in a place where you can purchase them to watch them because this video in particular is going to be a masterclass style. So what I think I will do with Substack is write about astrology. When I send over my bio in for speaking engagements, one of the things I say is that the first title I give myself is writer. And then I talk about astrology, and then I say I write about my messy human life. And I'm also a bereaved mother. I lost a child in 2022. And so I speak about grief quite often. And that's part of why I wanted to begin this masterclass series. So I haven't seen anybody give really proper treatment to the asteroid goddesses. Um, and that could be because I'm not looking in the right places. There may be people who have really spoken in depth about the asteroid goddesses. For me, I haven't been able to find a resource that digs in deep to each of the goddesses and really goes through them like with slides, like proper treatment. And so I thought, well, I'm going to put together like a master class that goes over all four of them. And Ceres being the first one to begin with. Ceres is actually been upgraded to a dwarf planet, so she's not even an asteroid anymore. She got upgraded, and Pluto got downgraded to being a dwarf planet, and they're roughly the same size, which is interesting because their mythology coincides with each other. So she is a really large body, and the asteroid belt is between Mars and Jupiter. And so these asteroids are close to us. And so an asteroid that is actually the size of a dwarf planet, sitting between Mars and Jupiter. And remember, Mars is a planet that governs up or is in our neighborhood, meaning it's beside the Earth. So these asteroid goddesses are actually very close to us and they have a profound influence on them. And not long ago, maybe for the last year or so, I'd sort of gotten away from writing about the feminine and being into any kind of goddess work. If you follow me religiously, you know that I had a really rough year last year. My body slammed into perimenopause. I didn't even know what that was or that was the thing that I was dealing with in the beginning. So I had all this mysterious stuff happening with my body that I didn't understand, and I had a really hard time making friends with it. If you know me well, you know I have been through a lot in my life, and I tend to have a particular orientation to dealing with the things that happen to me, and this blew me out. This slamming into perimenopause. I got anxiety for the first time I want to say ever. I've had anxiety, of course, because I'm human, but it goes away. This was like a daily screed of anxiousness and fear and terror that just would not let me go. And my body, like bodies do, had an extraordinary reaction to feeling terrified 24/7. And so I started to have nerve pain. Anyways, it was a whole thing. And it really pulled me out of my body in a way, it felt like. And I got away from writing about what really helps to anchor me. And writing in and of itself helps to anchor me, but I got away from writing about the goddesses, is my long winded point. And I really got the hit just this last month that like I need to return to my foundations, that the goddesses, the archetypes, the mythology that runs through the astrology is my home base. And it feels good to me when I am tuned into that channel. And I learn when I write. I'm somebody who researches while I'm writing, and I'm always learning and expanding as I stay connected to the mythology, the goddesses, and the feminine. And so this is kind of a return for me to that home channel. And so what happened when I was making the slides was that this got very long. I felt like everything that I was researching was important to put into the masterclass. And so you have a full masterclass on just Ceres herself. And then what I will do is make a series. This is on Ceres, Demeter. I will make a series about the asteroid goddesses so that we can really dig in deep to what these feminine bodies are doing, and how they are so close to the earth and how they affect us. And so without further ado, I want to introduce first, this is the book that I used. It's called Asteroid Goddesses. It's by Demetra George and Douglas Block. I pulled a lot of the information and a lot of like direct writing and quotes from the book. And so I want to make sure that I credit Demetra and her phenomenal work and research into the asteroid goddesses. Demetra is a true luminary inside of the astrology community, and she is well known for her work with the asteroid goddesses, for bringing the feminine um, into astrology. She has not only spent part of her career really delving deeply into the goddesses, but into mythology. She writes a book about the mythology of all of the planets. That's a really interesting book. She gives tours on the islands of Greece, and she has kind of pivoted her career a little bit into studying and teaching now Hellenistic astrology, which is a specific kind of genre inside of astrology. So let me take a moment, because I'm talking about her astrology career, to kind of introduce you to the way I look at a chart and look at astrology. So for me, I was trained differently. I'm not a Hellenistic astrologer. Hellenistic astrology is kind of the astrology of the ancient Greeks. There's a lot of really interesting techniques that they use that I don't know about. Um, when you're an astrologer, it's kind of like being a doctor. You can choose to go into a kind of specialty once you get the basics of astrology down. And for me, I'm an archetypal astrologer, and archetypal astrologers tend to be more psychologically based. My lineage is through Jung, Stan Groff, Richard Tarnas, and then my teacher was Ren Butler. And so we tend to look at the chart more archetypally, and I think that it allows more fluidity and intuition to come in to the way that we read charts. There's less technicality and more, looking at the archetypal matrix of the chart. Now, for that, to study or to know about archetypes, you really do have to be in touch with the mythology, right? And so we will look at Ceres today through her archetype, through her mythology, and then through the things that she governs in the astrology chart. Um, she is in my own chart in Aries, where she happens to be now, which is, I think, in part what's inspired me to focus on her. Um, with her conjunct my moon in Aries, um, she is part of my lunar complex, right? She is the archetype of the Great Mother. And the thing that I love most about her and relate to, um, is that she is the, I've got to say, hands down, the quintessential archetype of grief. I don't think there's any other mythology that treats grief quite the way her mythology does, and we'll take a look at that. So, without further ado, thank you for sitting through my kind of long winded introduction. I think, I wanted to share some things and connect with you up front before we just go into kind of like the dry reading of slides. There are a lot of slides. You are welcome to take a notebook out and to make notes if you want to. I think I will include a link to the slides so that you have them if you want them. But really, what I would love it if you did is to just kind of sit back and soak in the information as we get like a multi-dimensional view of Demeter, of Ceres, and of the things that she governs, because they're really important. I was going to say to women, but I think not just to women, to all of us. Like she's a, a goddess who had a very human experience. Um, and that's what I love about her. She's so relatable. And you'll see that as we go through the slides. Okay. So technology is not my thing. Give me just a sec to make sure that I'm on the proper page and the proper slide. Right. And then I will share. Okay. So, oh, I don't know why it put the company name thing in here. So I chose a template to make the slides with, and I had to do a lot of deleting of some of the template stuff. So apologies that you kind of see company name. My company name is Red Moon Revival, and my name is Damascena Tanu, so maybe I will make that introduction here. And then what we're looking at, what we're going to explore through this series, and maybe I'll even come in and do a masterclass on Venus herself and the moon. Maybe we'll spend the year kind of really deeply delving into the feminine principle in the chart. In astrology, if you look at just um, the regular pantheon of planets that most astrologers use, Sun through, let's say, Pluto, right? There's really only two feminine archetypes if you don't add in the asteroid goddesses, and that is the moon and Venus. And while I can make an argument that Venus herself, her journey in her cycle very much mirrors the mythology of Demeter, or of Persephone, let's say, and that Venus herself makes a descent into the underworld and uh, makes an ascent or a triumphant return, or resurrection. Um, you know, there isn't much to go on. The rest of the planets, the sun is thought of as masculine, Mercury is thought of as kind of the sacred androgyne, where he can be hermaphroditic if we want to, or we don't really assign gender to Mercury. But then we've got Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, who are all masculine, right? And so we want to do some exploration of the feminine principle in the chart, given that the feminine itself is 50% of the population. And so, this is helping to give representation to the feminine principle, right? And then again, I want to give Demetra George credit and her book Asteroid Goddesses. So Ceres is the goddess of nurturance, agriculture, cycles, and death and grief. And we'll see all of this as we move through the slides and we explore her mythology. Nurturance is really important, and I think it's something that feels really mundane when we first say it, or like, it's sort of this background thing that we're all in relationship to in some way. How we nurture ourselves, how we nurture others, how we ourselves are nurtured by others, how our life feels nurturing, life-giving. Agriculture, right? Like agriculture is tilling the soil and making something grow. And so these aren't just literal things where we're actually planting a seed in the ground. No, um, this can be metaphorical as well. Like, how are we tending to the seeds that we've planted? This is sort of like I can use my Substack, for example. Like, this is a place I want to grow and nurture community, right? Like I'm planting the seeds by creating some of these master classes to invite you to come in, to invite you to come deeper. And so when we think about Ceres and we throw out terms like nurturance and agriculture and cycles, these all feel just sort of mundane or background, but really they're integral to the way that we live our lives. And I can say as an astrologer and no uncertain terms that each soul incarnated with a particular purpose and a particular blueprint. And every one of us is meant to be a creator in some way. And so Cirrus invites us to look at the creative principle inside of us through this lens, through the lens of how we nurture and how we grow things and how there are particular cycles. Like I often have clients come to me and say things like, I'm so bad at creating. I never finish what I start, or I start something and then I set it down. And I try and reframe that for them and say that is a creative process in and of itself. Sometimes, um, you know, we pick up something and it's kind of like the skill of weaving, right? And then we set it down because there is n- there is like we don't have anything left to give on it. It's kind of petered out in some way. And we just set it down. It's not like we kill it, right? It's like an open tab on a computer. And then we go and start a new project. And then something from the new project pings something from the older project. And so we go back and we weave again with it. So many of us are cyclical creators like that, like where we don't create from a linear perspective. And she really sort of like governs how we create and in our own cycles. And that in and of itself and it is an example of a cycle. So Ceres is Demeter in the Greek pantheon. And I know a lot of people have heard of Demeter and maybe haven't heard of Ceres. And so Ceres is the Roman name for Demeter. The name is derived, Demeter, from the meaning Earth Mother in Greek, and she's of the Olympian pantheon. She's the daughter of Saturn and Rhea, and Saturn and Rhea are a famous couple in the Greek pantheon. Saturn and Rhea were of the Titan clan, if you want to call it that. She had sisters by Saturn and Rhea, Vesta, Juno, Jupiter, who is Zeus in Greek, Neptune, and Pluto. And this little family, these children of Saturn and Rhea, were all swallowed by their father Saturn, and who was again, like I said, a Titan. And so later they were freed from Saturn's belly, essentially, by their brother Zeus when he triumphed over his father in a battle. And they say that Saturn ruled over what is essentially a golden age, right? And that everyone in Saturn's age had enough. They had enough food, they had enough sustenance, they had enough to live, except none of them were free. He ruled with an iron fist. He was sort of like what we might think of as a dictator. He decided that everyone got what they got. He meted out, like their allowance. And that was it. And when Zeus came along, um, he wanted to break out of this mold. He wanted to free the people. And so it's often thought that this battle was a like between father and son, was a battle for the right to use free will. And so if you think about this golden age, it was almost as if with Saturn meeting things out, that Saturn governed fate. And that Zeus governed free will because he came and fought for the people to have the right to use free will. So Demeter gave humanity two gifts, it said, agriculture and the Eleusinian mysteries. And we'll see how this plays out. The Eleusinian mysteries are the mysteries of death and resurrection. And um, they were generated through her experience of losing her daughter, Persephone. So Demeter's myth, and this is a picture here of of really of Persephone and how we see kind of the dark quality and the light quality. And here is her pomegranate that she ate in the underworld. So long ago, I'm going to read this to you. And I hate when people read to me on slides, so I'm going to do it with as much um, flourish as possible, just to make it feel interesting. Long ago, Ceres and her beloved daughter Persephone wandered the earth together. So happy were they in each other's presence that it blessed the earth with a perpetual summer or a perpetual season of harvest. In this golden age, they knew no deprivation, no winter. Persephone grew to be as beautiful as her mother and was greatly desired by men and the gods alike. The love between mother and daughter was so strong that they had no desire to be parted. So all the suitors were rebuffed. One day, Persephone wandered into the Mycenaean fields where she was drawn to a hundred bloom narcissus flower. As Persephone plucked it and inhaled its fragrance, the earth suddenly opened and formed a deep abyss from which emerged Pluto, god of the underworld, who had long been covetous of Persephone. And we can see in this telling that stasis had sort of set in, right? Persephone was living this life of a perpetual summer, of always being beautiful, a perpetual harvest. And she was just happy, right? There was no impetus for her to grow or to do anything other than live in this perpetual summer. And so we can see in the myth that what happens when the earth suddenly opened and formed a deep abyss was like all of the sudden her innocence was lost, right? There's this sense of something disrupting this perpetual summer. It is the breaking of stasis. And so it goes to remind us, right? And with Ceres ruling the cycles, that things can only be sort of like good for so long. Like I love. There's nothing I love more than being like cozy and watching a good Netflix show, binge watching a good Netflix show. And I can do that for days on end, right? And still take care of my little responsibilities here and there. And I have to remember that life is not always going to serve me up a great cozy area to binge watch TV, right? Like you can see how if I just did that day in and day out, that stasis would set in. I wouldn't be growing. I wouldn't be evolving as a person. I wouldn't be in a relationship or sharing my life. That is an example of stasis. And so here we're getting the first embers in the mythology of why cycles are important, right? So, riding on his golden, fiery chariot, drawn by four screeching black horses, Pluto seizes Persephone, the screaming maiden. He ravishes her and carries her off to the realm of the dead to become his bride and queen. So he wants a of queen of the night, queen of the dead, right? Queen of the underworld. And here again, I just want to reiterate that there's this sense of a loss of innocence. And we all carry the seeds of Persephone's story. We can even think for ourselves, like when was the first time that we realized, and this is an important piece of doing any kind of inner work, right? And if we want to plot ourselves into the Persephone myth, right, to make friends with this myth, to understand our own inner mythology, what when was the first time we realized something isn't right here? I am not okay, right? Just that kind of question, like something isn't right. I am not okay. And bringing yourself back into your life, into your history, maybe into your childhood, and kind of, allowing yourself to remember and bring up that experience. And that is kind of a Persephone experience. So the earth torn the torn earth immediately sealed itself after. Persephone was taken to the underworld, and it left behind no visual evidence that the incident even occurred. And that's something that happens to a lot of us. Like we have a psychic break, right? And there is no scar. Like you can't tell. Like all of last year, when I was sitting in that fear and terror, you couldn't necessarily tell that anything had happened to me or that anything was wrong with me. There was no physical evidence. You cannot tell by looking at me if you're next to me in a store that I lost my son, that my son died. And so many of us live with these invisible scars where an experience happened, the earth opened, and it then resealed itself, but there has been a rupture, there's been a fracture, there's been a break, right? Where in our lives have we had an event so catastrophic to our being that left behind no physical evidence, yet we were changed completely? This is like a Ceres and Persephone event. So when Ceres returned to the meadow where Persephone was picking flowers, she could find no trace of her daughter. She raced over the fields and hills, calling out to Persephone. Her anxiety turned to desperation and panic as she realized that no one knew the whereabouts of her daughter. For 9 days and nights, the grief stricken mother refused to eat or bathe. Instead, she wandered the earth with blazing torches, searching everywhere for her. On the 10th day, Ceres encountered the crone goddess Hecate, who is the goddess of the crossroads. Hecate suggested that she consult the sun god and seer Helios. Helios told her about Persephone's abduction by Pluto, who had acted with the approval of her brother Zeus. Upon hearing the news, Ceres tore the diadem from her head and wrapped herself in mourning clothes, full of hatred towards Zeus for his betrayal. And she withdrew from Mount Olympus to avoid him and his compatriots. She disguised her true identity and wandered the countryside as a bereaved old woman. And we see here this sense of um, a lack of permission to grieve and the need to disguise herself as an old woman, and so often when we have those psychic fractures that leave behind no visible scar, we don't feel permission to grieve, to feel the pain of our loss, to feel the pain of our fracture. And certainly like last year in what I was experiencing, I felt a lack of permission because everything that was happening to me felt so internal, right? And I kept having to allow myself to lean into the fear and the terror, but I didn't feel a lot of permission to do that. So it took a long time to sort of metabolize and digest within myself. And so, thinking here of times in which we are experiencing loss and grief, and or deep fractures, deep pain, and not giving ourselves permission to actually feel what we are experiencing. And the need that like Demeter had to disguise herself so that she had the permission as a goddess, like she didn't feel like she could mourn deeply with her diadem on. So she tore it off. And so yeah, this is part of her um, Demeter Sirius's grief structure or grief story, and the reminder that we have to give ourselves permission, as she is the goddess of nurturance and agriculture, to metabolize and to digest our experiences. Now she's wandering the countryside, right? So after a very long time had passed, Ceres sought refuge in a town called Eleusis, where she was met at the well by four daughters of King Celius, who invited her to return with him to the palace. There she met the queen, who welcomed her and put her infant son in her care. In her care, she brought him up like a god. In her desire to make this infant son immortal, and presumably she's doing this to keep him safe, or in some way this would protect her from a further loss of a child she'd grown to love. So Ceres anointed him with the ambrosia of immortality by day and placed him in the fire to burn off his mortality by night. This was kind of a ritual she was doing with this infant child to, um, yeah, to burn off his mortality, to give him immortality. And again, like I said, there's this desire in her, we can see it in the myth, to keep this child safe so that she doesn't have to experience another love that she's grown attached to. Um, one evening, as she was conducting this ritual, the queen walked by the room they were doing the ritual in and was absolutely horrified. She cried out, as any mother would, in terror. So Ceres was outraged. This isn't like she didn't respond by being demure or giving deference to the queen in her station. Instead, she became outraged uh, at being interrupted, and snatched the boy from the fire and cast him to the ground. And she revealed her identity then as a goddess and ordered that a temple be built with an altar for her, where mortals could be initiated into her rites and offer her worship. So thus was born the Eleusinian mysteries. And in a sense, this passage here explains the breaking of out of the psychic attachment that she had to the child, where she, in a sense, yes, she was outraged that the ritual had been interrupted, but more than that, she saw in that instance that she could not create um, an immortal, that there had to be a death in order to rise, to resurrect, as the um, Eleusinian mystery bears out, and we will see in this writing. So after Ceres retired to her temple, where she continued to mourn the loss of her daughter afterwards, so she goes to her temple to mourn the loss of her daughter, and in her grief and rage, grief that had now curdled into something that was life taking rather than life giving, we see her misplace her rage. So she prepared a terrible year for mankind. The earth would refuse to give forth any crops, and the ground would be destroyed, and the fruit would rot on the trees. This is because she's so angry that she still does not have her daughter back. If she, the goddess of fertility, must live without her child, then humanity must suffer as well. In their desperation, for food. Now man is hungry, right? Their food has all rotted. They are dying. They are starving. In their desperation, mankind began to pray to Zeus to intervene. He realized that if humanity died out, there would be no one to worship the gods. And this is an interesting statement here in and of itself. It kind of goes to show and it's sort of outside of this myth archetypally, but like this circuitry between uh, divinity and humanity, and that there is some kind of purposeful nurturance, food, growth that happens when um, the gods are worshipped, right? Like we get nurturance from that. There is a rightfulness in the way the sentence is structured, and see if you could feel it. He realized that if humanity died out, there would be no one left to worship the gods. And so it's like um it's being presented to us, this sort of like uh, bind humanity is in with the gods, right? We need the gods, and the gods need us. So each of the gods gave Demeter a gift, trying to persuade her to show mercy, but she would not be moved. So, realizing defeat, Zeus commanded Pluto to release Persephone. Pluto, though, in his slyness, agreed to let Persephone go, but first he tempted her by offering her pomegranate seeds. Since the pomegranate was the fruit of sexual consummation, Persephone's consent rendered her marriage union with him indissoluble. So she ate some of the pomegranate, which is the fruit of sexual consummation. And because she ate that fruit, um, it her marriage became indissoluble, could not be annulled. So Zeus decreed that for each seed she ate, she would spend a portion of the year with him and a portion of the year with Ceres. And so it came to be that Persephone ate 6 pomegranate seeds. And so she spent 6 months in the underworld with Pluto and 6 months in the upper world with Ceres. And so it came to pass that each spring, Persephone emerges from the underworld. So, on an outer level, this story is about seasons and Ceres's governance of the agricultural cycle. So, in a sense, when Persephone is in the underworld, it is winter time, and the earth does not bear its fruits, in a sense. And then when she emerges, and this from an astrological perspective is marked at the fall equinox, right? So the fall equinox is part of the Eleusinian mysteries and the Eleusinian rites that they perform. Is when Persephone descends to the underworld, and the spring equinox is the festival of when she rises from the underworld and reunites with Demeter, and then the earth begins to bear fruits again. So, on an outer level, that's what this myth displays to us. But on an inner level, the reenactment of this drama gave humanity access to the archetypal themes of loss and return. And so, on the esoteric level, taught by the initiates of the Eleusinian mysteries, this ritual revealed the great transformation mystery, the cycle of birth, death, and renewal, and the fact that humanity, like we can have um, death and rebirth while we're living. They are called to the master's little deaths. So before Ceres left Eleusis, she expressed her gratitude to the city by giving the king's oldest son the first grain of corn. She then instructed him to convey her sacred art of agriculture to all humanity. So that's part of the outer mysteries. And then finally, she taught the people of Eleusis her sacred rites and initiated them into her divine worship. And then these rites became sacred all over the world. So people came in pilgrimage. This is real. Um, Not a mythic story. It's real that people came to Eleusis. Uh, they drank often what's called the kykeon, which is a drink that many think it's a beer-like drink that's infused with uh, entheogenic medicine, right? And they would go through this death and rebirth ritual. And first there was like a purification ritual. It was a whole like 9-day event. And we saw that 9 days in the beginning of the myth. So, as the great mother goddess of Crete, now this is sort of a different myth, she was involved in fertility rites. There is ample evidence that the myths preceding this, so that this was a story handed down lineage wise um, from Inanna and Isis, who is essentially Venus. This is like the resurrection of the vegetation gods that we have, given that it wasn't Isis who was resurrected in her story, it was Osiris who was a vegetation god. So we sort of see that this myth is um, myths are like Russian nesting dolls, like myths are seated inside of other myths that precede them. So in this version, in which Pluto rapes Persephone, right, this symbolizes the patriarchal power struggles of the time. across all of the differing versions of her myth, we see that she is the embodiment of the great mother goddess. That is the thing that doesn't change across all of these differing myths. So I'm not sure that any other myth holds the codes of grief and lament the way that hers does. There is similar grief and lament in Inanna's myth. Inanna is going down because she heard of the death of her sister's husband. There's great lament with Erishkigal, who happens to be giving birth in that story, and Inanna dies. Isis, of course, is grief stricken at the loss of her husband, right? And she goes and finds all 14 pieces of him and puts them together. And then the phallus of the um, kind of re architected Osiris, she's able to get pregnant and give birth. But we don't see that giving birth motif as much like in the Persephone myth. Of course, it's sort of inherent in the idea of cycles and the changing of seasons. What we see in the Persephone myth, what is most prevalent, I believe, is the grief, is the lament, is the level of catastrophic loss we feel, is the breaking of the parent-child bond, which is necessary for souls to individuate. Like it is rightful for the parent-child bond to have a rupture so that the child has an impetus to go out and make their own way in the world, to individuate. There has to be a sort of rupture, and it's meant to be the mother who sort of pulls back um, her nurturance a little bit to allow the child to go out on their own. Again, that's a very Western model. I know in the East there isn't the same kind of there isn't the same import put on the idea of individuation, and the family unit tends to stay much more intact, right? It's a very Western mindset that thinks that, like, the mono myth, Joseph Campbell, that idea of, the hero's journey. This is sort of the embodiment, what we're speaking of now with Ceres's myth. This is the embodiment of the heroine's journey, right? So within the framework of this archetypal drama in the Eleusinian mysteries, loss and return, these rites are still taking place today, as evidenced by psychotherapists who have observed the symbols of the ancient initiatory process in their client experiences. And of course, if you come and study with me, we reenact a version of this myth as well in a mystery school setting. So this here is Ceres's glyph, astrologically speaking. It is the crescent um, sitting atop the cross of matter. So it's kind of like the moon sitting atop the cross of humanity or matter in a sense. So the lunar is given precedence here. Um, it also can be a sickle, right? So her symbols, Demeter's symbols, are the sickle and the plow, ears of corn and wheat, the cornucopia, right? So that sense of the multitudes of abundance, right? The poppy flower, which is part of the Eleusinian mysteries, the solace for human grief. The pig, the torch, and the crane bird are all symbols that are related to Ceres. And so the associated rulerships in astrology are Cancer, Taurus, and then Cancer, the Taurus Scorpio polarity and how it works together, in that Taurus is abundance, it is accumulation, and Scorpio is the cutting off of that. It's the loss, and I want to just say loss, but it's the antithesis of accumulation. It's purging in a sense. And then also Virgo. So the associated rulerships, again, because I kind of got sidetracked, there are Cancer, the Taurus Scorpio polarity, and Virgo. And then there's also, this essence of anger and compassion inside of Demeter's mythology. Like we saw that the compassion she had for the child that she was looking after or nannying, um, and and anger and rage are definitely involved in her mythology. And so when we think of the Great Mother, oftentimes what we think about are those accumulation, abundance, love, cycles, but we don't normally associate anger and rage and wrathfulness and punishment, right, with the uh, Ceres archetype, but we should, right? Because the Great Mother is kind of the face of cycles, and part of cycles are this kind of um, juxtaposition of anger and compassion, love and rage. And our lives are like that. If you've been anybody's been in a long-term relationship, long-term relationships cycle in and out of affection and anger and things like that. So there's this real um, sense of humanity with Ceres, like that she is close to what it is to be human, more than some of the other gods. So enter in, this is a quote by Carl Kareni. He says, to enter into the figure of Ceres is to be pursued, to be robbed, to be raped, to fail to understand, to rage and to grieve, but then to get everything back and be born again. And so he is a famous mythologist, and he's essentially talking to us about the Eleusinian mysteries, the loss, the rage, the grief, and then the death, right, and the rebirth, to be born again and to come back into abundance. So she symbolizes the function of the mother in psychology. Ceres governs a number of psychological qualities that cannot be described in any one zodiacal sign. So her attributes are best depicted, like we said, in Cancer, the Taurus Scorpio axis, and Virgo, as we mentioned before. So Ceres is as the ruler of Cancer. So when we think about where do we place or best understand Ceres in the chart, when we place her in Cancer, she is the maternal instinct and primarily symbolizes the need to nurture and care for others. She is the type of individual that feels a powerful need to become a parent and to nurture, raise, and provide for his or her children. So there's this um, parental need embedded inside of Ceres. Ceres transits and progressions in astrology can be linked to pregnancy and childbirth. We see that all the time, as well as for difficulties with either of those things. So she's not placed well or she's afflicted, which is something that we say in astrology. We might see that there's difficulty getting pregnant. In her role of provider, she nurtures others on the physical, emotional, and the spiritual layers of reality. And Cancer series indicates the quality of relationship between how we were mothered and how we mother. So this can come through a variety of figures, however, like a grandparent, a father, an aunt, an uncle, etc. So as the goddess of fertility and agriculture, Ceres personifies the all nourishing earth mother. So we can think of that like in the infant's first experience of love and security comes through being fed by the mother. So, a great archetypal motif for Ceres is it's also very much like the Virgin Mary motif, like with the mother holding the babe at her breast, like this level of security and affection between and connection between mother and child. And if we can imagine ourselves a babe at the breast held in our mother's unconditionally loving embrace, that level of security is sort of the exalted form of Ceres. So, as the goddess of fertility and agriculture, she personifies this all nourishing mother. So, she governs, because of this motif, hunger and appetite. So, not just for food, but our hunger for life. If our hunger for appetite is squashed, we can look at Ceres in the chart and see what condition she's in. Like if she's afflicted or if she's traveling over a difficult area of the chart or a chart that we haven't worked out yet, like like in our archetypal matrix, maybe it's a square in our chart that we haven't really worked out yet. We can find that issues with hunger come up. And again, this is not just literal hunger, it can be metaphorical, like where our zest for life just feels depleted or gone. So, Ceres food, hunger, and appetites. We aren't to mistake Ceres here for the all nourishing feminine that is only here to take care of us. We need the light feminine to soothe and take care of us, yes, but this is the feminine created by the patriarchy, the one that wants to soothe and take care of us, the one that is not threatening, that doesn't force us to transform. Ceres forces us to confront these places within us. She forces us to face what we fear. She elevates us through transformation, right? And so we see that with her. Like we said, she isn't just the face of compassion, which is the face of the goddess that the patriarchy assigned. No, she is the entire cycle. She asks us to deeply look at our relationships to various appetites and hungers. She asks us if we are really living. She is kind and compassionate, yes, but she also embodies some of this fierceness, as we'll see when we look at her on the Taurus Scorpio axis. So, because our first experiences come through being fed, this creates foundation for our self-worth. These early imprints become the basis for healthy self-acceptance and self-esteem. If Ceres, the kind of mother love, is absent or lacking, then we create a poor self image of ourselves and low self esteem develops in the later years. So, if there's a rupture here, we must, as it is Ceres who forces us to confront and transform, we must later come back and look at this most primary, primal relationship and where it was fractured. As we saw in the Ceres myth, she gives us a map for doing this work in her gift of the Eleusinian Mysteries. So ideally, the type of love imparted by the mother is unconditional, for example, without expectations. And when this isn't the case, Ceres's astrological position will point to what the child has to do in order to gain parental approval and receive love. For example, a child with Ceres and Aries receives nurturance through being granted independence. Like this child is going to strive for independence, and sometimes we have a mother who is smothering. So a distortion of this need may occur in two ways. First, the child may be denied autonomy by an overly domineering parent. And in this case, the child will deny his or her assertive impulses, like that will get inverted and turned in on itself. And later, the child will uh, abandon its assertive impulses because it was taught to um, override them. Secondly, the child might be pushed towards autonomy before he or she is ready to take on this responsibility, thereby creating feelings of fear and self doubt. And in my case, because I have Ceres and Aries, I can speak to having both things happen to me. I really struggled for independence. I had an overly smothering mother. I then got pregnant very early, so I had too much responsibility that I wasn't ready for. And so I had this sort of kind of push pull. So, thereby, this creates feelings of fear and self doubt. So, in either case, the child's independent needs are not adequately nurtured, and it hinders the development of his or her self assertion skills. And this is something that I've had to work out. So, astrologically speaking, this is a way to read Ceres for people who are into astrology and want to talk about the astrological pieces of it. So this is something we can see in the chart essentially. So the ability to love comes through a well-adjusted Ceres. In cases where Ceres is unbalanced or deficient, a child can become self-rejecting instead of self-accepting. This produces a critical judgmental attitude towards others and resentment over their achievements. And so, in a sense, Ceres kind of can show us in the chart how well we mother ourselves. I have, in a way, where my moon is in my chart, it's conjunct Ceres. I have a mother who gave me up for adoption, so there's abandonment there. Then I have a mother who is a little over smothering. And I think Ceres has really shown me how I mother myself, right? Like how I have been able to go in and mother myself. And I've done that all my life for myself. Buddhists have a beautiful frame on Ceres or this kind of action in the chart. They say to heal these judgments that very well may curdle into jealousy, we must develop an attitude of compassion. So this is that speaks to that self-mothering function, sending compassion to the self and sending compassion to others who we've judged harshly. And often it's ourselves that we judge most. They believe that we have all mothered each other in various incarnations. So each person we meet was either our mother or a child in another life. And I think that that is a beautiful way to orient to ourselves and to the world, um, not in an effort to bypass anything, but in an effort to kind of like heal and soothe some of the wounds that come between parent and child. All right. Because Ceres governs mothering, she rules all of the complexes that can arise from mothering. Oops. The passivity complex, which is where mother love is experienced as primarily conditional. Um, he or she will respond by either living up to parental expectations or by failing to do so. Um, Food complexes, and I'm going to give you guys the slides. I just know we're running long and I don't want to like sit here and read all these things to you. Food complexes and her anger over her daughter's abduction. Ceres halted all food production. Thus, challenging aspects to Ceres in astrology can often indicate a parent punishing the child by withholding nourishment. And of course, this can be metaphorical as well, like sending a child to bed without dinner, um, telling a child, like when you ground a child, you're essentially taking away all of their zest for life, their ability to be active. And so, there can become this like hunger for life complex that comes up, relationship complexes. The mother imprint leaves such a strong impression on the psyche, thus flowing over into our interpersonal relationships. We all know this, mother complexes. So we see this most often with Ceres in the seventh house or aspected to Venus, Mars, or Juno. And the parental relationships become the role model for future adult partnerships. We all have this to a certain degree. It just, when it can be out of balance, is when Ceres is in the seventh house or aspected to Venus, Mars, or Juno. Just saying. I'd also add in the moon here. Mother projections. Oops. Every mother contains her daughter in herself, and every daughter contains her mother. Every woman extends backward into her mother and forward into her daughter. And so Sirius is a significator of the secret unrealized hopes, dreams, anxiety, fears, and disillusionments that are transferred from mother to child. And she rules this kind of function, this going forward into ourselves and going backwards, this sort of idea. Cancer is the idea of blood lineage, the umbilical cord. And so it's worth meditating on what these subliminal messages are that we received through lineage, what hopes or fears or anxieties have been projected onto us through our lineage. So Ceres now, as ruler of, sorry, as the ruler of the Taurus Scorpio polarity. Sorry. Okay. The powerful correspondence between Ceres and the polarity of Taurus Scorpio may be observed in four distinct ways. So the moon, which is the parent of Ceres, is exalted in the sign of Taurus, and Ceres was the goddess of agriculture who grounded the lunar energy onto the physical plane to create the fertile earth, Taurus. That's sort of one. Two, the Eleusinian mysteries of Ceres were officiated by a sacred priest called the Hierophant. And the Hierophant is the card that governs Taurus in the zodiac or in the tarot deck, right? It's the Hierophant that is in with Taurus. So there's some connection between the Eleusinian mysteries, the Hierophant who officiated over it, and the sign of Taurus. 3. In her mythology, Ceres' adversary was none other than Pluto, the ruler of Scorpio, and the opposing sign to Taurus. This is a polarity. And so, 4, the Buddha was also born, attained enlightenment, and died um, during the Taurus Scorpio full moon. So, his teachings focus on the issues of attachment, Taurus, and death, of letting go, Scorpio. And so, we can sort of see this kind of juxtaposition presiding over all of the spiritual, uh, I guess, all of the almost all of the spiritual. I'm trying to think if it's in Islam, this kind of idea of death and rebirth. It's certainly in the Christian tradition. I mean, we see this a lot, is what I'm saying. In being forced to release her attachment to her daughter and presiding over the rights of the dead, Ceres likewise addresses these Taurus Scorpio themes. So to sum it up, the ruler of the Taurus Scorpio polarity, like if she were to rule this polarity, Ceres in the horoscope describes the psychological experiences of attachment, separation, and loss, death, and then renewal, the capacity for deep grief, sorrow, and rage, and then the need to learn how to share. Her mythos contains the guideposts for traversing these paths of death and regeneration. And so, for those whose chart contains a strong Ceres, the need to transform their attachments to the people they love and the objects or ideas that they value can become a major life lesson. Because our universe is holistic and ever strives towards balance, strong attachment sets into motion the very causes and conditions that separate the person from his object of desire. We do not feel deep grief and deep loss and deep pain and deep fractures from things that we are not attached to begin with. So this was the exact experience of the Ceres and Persephone myth. Ceres' unwillingness to let her go. That, remember, we, like in one of the very first slides, we talked about stasis having set in. They just wanted to live in this perpetual summer. And so Ceres needed to learn to let her go, to give her the experience of independence that she needed to grow in her own life. So after being violently separated from Persephone, Ceres retaliates by halting food production. Thus, the dark side of Ceres symbolizes the experience of being denied and cut off from life-sustaining nourishment. Therefore, when Ceres is prominent in the chart or aspected to Pluto, separations may become a constant theme in the life of a person. And so, in your chart, if you've got Ceres and Pluto, in my chart, they're opposite from each other. Um, and yes, loss has been a constant theme in my life. It doesn't stop me from loving. So examples include the loss of one's parents through death, rejection, abandonment, or illness, the loss of one's children. We see Ceres, she's prominent in my chart, in prominent in the charts of people who lose children. Just because she's prominent in your chart does not mean you're going to lose a child. I want to say that here. Like if you've got a really strong Ceres, maybe she's conjunct Pluto in your chart, squaring Pluto, it does not mean you're going to lose a child. I'm just saying we often see her prominent in charts of mothers of loss. We might see loss through death, through a custody battle, abduction, and separations from relationships. One's pets, work may have an insecure environment, and so if she's aspected to Pluto or along the Taurus Scorpio polarity, these are some themes that might arise in the person's life. I'm just deciding if following the loss of her daughter, Ceres entered a prolonged period of rage, grief, and sorrow. So, therefore, Ceres transits often depict those times when we mourn the loss of something, a loved one or a way of life. In her mythos, she passed through the stages of the normal grieving process. She had shock, depression, guilt, anger, and finally acceptance and meaning making with the erection of the mysteries. Hence, she provides us with a map for our own losses. I'm going to give you guys these slides. It's just we're going really long. So through Pluto's abduction and the subsequent deal that was made with Ceres, she shows us the principle of sharing. Um, Her inability to let go, which we saw in the earlier slides, was hindering her ability, Persephone, her daughter's ability to grow and have a sacred union for herself. Ceres' attachment was causing stasis in Persephone's life. So, astrologically, we may see that a prominent Ceres Pluto transit relate to parents sharing children or being asked to share in our own relationships in some way. Ceres holding back the food is an example of not sharing, where we're holding back in our own lives. So there is a principle of sharing that is part of Ceres' entire motif. And then as the ruler of Cancer, Ceres provides foods as a means of communication, love, and acceptance. As the ruler of Virgo, the food and the all nourishing mother becomes an actual physical nourishment that bulbs, sustains, and repairs the cellular structure of the corporeal body. Uh, Virgo has a lot to do with digestion and elimination for the body. We can have stomach issues with Virgo. And so it talks about the quality of nutritional nourishment, which fosters growth and enables the individual to work and function in the world effectively. So we can see Scorpio as this, or sorry, Ceres in the horoscope as the significator of any and all vocations that involve growing, distribution, preparation, and serving food. This can be spiritual food as well. Virgo is a very spiritual sign. It's sort of the gestator of what comes through the sign of Pisces on their axis. So in Virgo, Ceres instills a natural concern for the well being of the body, and it ensures proper digestion of food, both physical food and the metabolization of experiences. Um, so the occult teachings of Ceres. Ceres gives the ancient Greeks and the Eleusinian mystery rites, which instructed the initiates in the death passage. So she is highly involved in what most mystery schools are doing. And in a way, this is related to Venus as well. The blood mysteries. So Ceres, as the goddess of death, functions as the matrix which receives the dead for rebirth. The entrance to rebirth is through the womb. Thus, Ceres, as mother, whose blood provides the nourishment for the fertilized egg and baby, rules over women's blood transformation mysteries. In the early offerings to the goddess, it was menstrual blood that was offered, not human blood. And so when the esoteric teachings degenerated, animal blood replaced menstrual blood. Today, tantric teachings still believe that the menstrual blood and semen are the original elixirs of life. So, in summary, she is the principle of unconditional love and acceptance, nurturing care and concern, self image, self worth, self esteem, and the love matrix. She brings forward the pathology of loss, rejection, abandonment, grief, suffering, anger. There is kind of the juxtaposition of attachment and aversion, uh, attachment and loss, attempting to maintain sole control over children, possessions, or creation, the principle of sharing and letting go, themes of transformation, birth, death, and renewal cycles, death and dying. Hospice work may be involved with serious single parenting and responsibility, relationship with nature and natural earth energies, productivity, work, efficient functioning of the body, occult themes, death passage, and the blood mysteries. So that was a lot. I feel like I really went on for a while. This may be a long video to take in. If you had to stop midway through and come back to it, I fully promote doing that kind of thing. I try to gauge when I'm full of information, and that was a lot of slides. So I will make sure that you have those slides. And then if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments. I'd love really to grow a community at Substack to get talking about this. I'd love to hear your series experiences, what this pained for you, where it comes up in your life. If you're dealing with loss and grief, I am as well. So, put those things in the comments of this video. And thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, and I will check in with you for our next in the series of the asteroid goddesses.